Good morning.
Hey, how's it going, Dave?
It's going great. You got a little haircut over there, huh?
I did. Yeah, I'm not sure if I just tried a new style.
Looks nice. Looking sharp, looking cleaned up, looking good. I mean, not that it wasn't cleaned up before.
Yeah, I got rid of my dreads.
That was a big change. Took me
I
by.
wish my
I'm,
I wish my
I'm
hair could
surprised
grow
when I got the
dreads.
hair color back.
Oh,
That's funny. Dave Wescott, CEO of TransBlue. This is David Vetter, Vice President of Operations here at TransBlue, and we're just here to hang out. This is a crazy topic we're going to talk about here today. We're on the entrepreneurial journey, and we're talking about robbing Peter to pay Paul. Isn't this a great? We have so many stories about this too. I mean, this is like I think this is one of the number one business killer. If you're looking to build $1 million business or even build a business at all, you can't rob Peter to pay Paul.
nah, and you see it not just as a business owners, but individual businesses can see it within their own staff. And it's bad. It gets bad. It's a giant snowball just waiting to be built, right?
It is. It's the
Roll it
real
down
deal,
the
man.
hill.
It's no joke. It's no joke. In fact, I'm actually going to shoot a little graphic over to my boy Ralph. Ralph is man from home. He's a little bit under the weather. Him and Todd Chapman are a little under the weather. But I'm going to shoot a little graphic over. I'm going to have him pull up a graphic to just chat about in here in a second when my email loads. I'm going to multitask. I'm going to do the number one thing I'm not supposed to do, and that's have my email open while I'm on the call. But it's okay.
I close mine down, so you're okay.
No, thanks, man. It's the constant beeping, right? That's the killer. That's why they say don't do it. But this is pretty serious stuff that we're talking about here, because robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, what happens a lot of times is we see it is, you've got X amount of money in the bank, and that money is sitting there, and then all of a sudden you're short on payroll, or you're short on a DRR tax payment or an IRS tax payment. How many people have had trouble making a tax payment at the end of the year? Or how many times does a tax payment potentially put you out of business because you're like, I owe what?
Yeah, exactly.
I owe what? It's a true story. First time I was in business, I was my first year in business. And I was sitting there and I was dating this girl. She got me on QuickBooks. This is a true story, man. So I used to do everything out of a 3-ring binder. No joke. So I would invoice my customers out of a 3-ring binder, and then I would highlight them, when I invoiced them, and I sent everything by mail, and then I would check them off, when they paid the bill. Like everything I did was out of a 3-ring binder. And so she got me on QuickBooks, and I was like, QuickBooks, what is this QuickBooks? $350 for this QuickBooks? This is not what I'm doing. So she convinces me that I need to be on QuickBooks. So I get on QuickBooks, turn on the computer. I think it's the first time I ever turned on a computer. I'm kind of serious and kind of joking. But so I get on QuickBooks, and she puts everything in, and she goes, okay, you owe $10,000 in taxes. I was like, what? $10,000 in taxes? What are you talking about? See what this QuickBooks does? All it did is screw my life up. $10,000. I said, that's my profit. That's my profit account. You're taking my profit account.
That QuickBooks probably just saved your life.
And her QuickBooks and her and that whole process, But that's, like so many times on this entrepreneurial journey, like depending on how you run your business, like you just don't know, right? Sometimes you don't know. And so robbing Peter to pay Paul, like in that particular situation, like I was depressed. I mean, thank God I had the money there to make the payment. But at the end of the day, that was depressing, because that was like, really, I got to send all my money to the government? I mean, that was literally my thought. Oh, I just worked all these months and all my money is going to the government. And that's the truth, man. And we see it, and you see it all the time in cash flow management and how you work on cash flow with the teams, and that just managing your money and knowing your cash flow. And you've got some fantastic tips on just cash flow so that you don't rob Peter to pay Paul. Why don't you share with us a few of the tips that you like to bring in? Because you've got one, very, actually it's intense, but it's very simplified cash flow that you work with franchise owners and business owners on all the time to help them, stay out of situations like, I just paid all my money to the government, or I didn't pay my money to the government and they just seized all my money out of the bank account. That's the worst.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've met so many business owners over my career, and actually, and even people that maybe have worked for me in the past, where the reason that they're working for me is because they had their own business or something, and they weren't paying attention to cash flow and how much money they had and where that money was actually allocated. It's really easy for a business owner to just see their bank account and just assume that, okay, I've got this much money in the bank, even though they know there's a quarterly payment coming up, there's an annual payment coming up to the IRS. You've got payroll and predicting payroll and just knowing when you're going to collect your money. And it's extremely important. And so, you can just start with something very simple. With our own internal teams, we have just a sample that we like to share with the different teams that shows them where their money's going to be, so that you can think that you're flying high, right? 1 week, first week of the month, second week of the month, whatever it may be. And you see this bank account that's got, 6 figures in it. And you're thinking, wow, that's fantastic. And, 6 weeks down the road, though, suddenly that thing drops dramatically, and you may have spent that money on a new truck or something like that. We see it with our subcontractors a lot too. Individuals that are really good at a trade craft may not have the best financial acumen, and it is important. You have to make sure that you understand that you owe taxes. Everybody knows that. You create and you generate revenue. You know it's coming. You have staff. You've got to pay them, and those are your biggest 2 priorities, right? The government is number 1 because they will shut everything down, and your staff's number 2 because they will walk, and that will shut you down too. So it is important always to make sure that you understand not just where your bank accounts are at today, but if all that money actually belongs to you. Or does it belong to your employees, or does it belong to the government, or does it belong to a contractor or a supplier or any of those items? Yep.
It's a true story. I remember we were working with a company called Landscaping, and they showed up at the office, and we had just given them a large down payment for a job. And if you remember, the owner showed up, in the largest, souped up Yellowstone, because those guys on that show Yellowstone, they drive those big Dodge Rams, right? And he shows up, and it's this huge white lifted beautiful Dodge Ram 3500. It wasn't 4-wheel drive, by the way. Why you buy a truck that big without it being 4-wheel drive, I have no idea. But he just shows up, and he's got this king truck,
right? I remember that.
You remember that, right? And
I definitely remember that. Yeah.
He was doing a good job, and he was banging out jobs, and all of a sudden, within 6 months, he closed his business.
Yep. Yeah, because he was treating all that money as his own. He was treating all that money like a lump sum. Yeah.
Couldn't perform. Go buy a big, huge, I don't know, what do those trucks cost? $80,000?
Oh, that one was easily $80,000. Yeah.
You see these monster trucks these guys come up with, and it's like they don't understand that now is going to cost them what, $1,500 a month or whatever it's going to be. So it's just it's that planning. It's like what you talk about with these cash flows, like these big spikes or these big, things that happen. What are you doing with your money? Where are you investing it? Where are you putting it? Where are you putting it off to the side? So I'm going to share a graphic here, and this is a graphic that I like to coach on. And can you actually share the Word doc, Ralph? I just sent the Word doc over. I'd like to share the Word doc if you can. If you don't mind, just making that switcheroo for us. Because we're going to talk about the bank account allocation here and why that is so important. All right, here he goes. We're redoing it. This is our deal. But this is, I think, what's really important is knowing where you're going to pay your money. And I'll tell you that the reason that I started putting this together was, I think it was back in 2009. I think your screen's on black mode. You need to change it to regular mode for us to be able to see that, buddy. But the reason that I started putting this together was because I was running a landscaping business, and we were going through, 2008 and 2009, and we had the economic downturn. And what we found was that, awesome, good job. Maybe now blow that bad boy up a little bit. What I found was that if I didn't start to break my money out, I started to have issues with, like, okay, how much of my money needs to go to payroll? And when it was all in one count, I wasn't as mature as a business leader as Mr. Dave Vetter on the call, right? Like, I had to figure this out on my own. No one showed me what I was supposed to do. And so what I knew was that if money was coming in, I had to separate my payroll, because back then, with 115 guys, which is, good size for some and small for others, but with 115 guys on the payroll, payroll is massive.
Yeah. Right.
That is a massive, massive payroll. And so how do you make sure that the payroll checks never bounce the bank, right? How do you make sure that you can pay your guys? Because if Friday comes along and all of a sudden it's a race to the bank, or they can't cash their checks, do you think that they're gonna be with you? And if you think about it, 115 guys is roughly a $6.9 million payroll. That's roughly $265,000 every 2 weeks. And so how do you allocate? How do you put that money aside to make sure you don't spend it? And so what I had to start to do was I had to understand what portion of my business was payroll. And what I figured was that about 15% of my business was payroll. Now, your business might be more, it might be less, but I figured that was about what it was for me. And then I figured, okay, I need to save money for the IRS taxes, right? Because the IRS taxes, those are a killer. I got to make sure I pay my taxes, whether you pay them quarterly now, or you're putting the money in monthly, or you're just paying at the end of the year. Like, when you get hit with an IRS tax payment and you're not expecting to have to pay $60,000, what do? Right? You immediately go into panic mode, and the penalties on the IRS are brutal. And then what is my profit? What do I actually get to take home? And two things that I really like to do, and Ralph is just doing a great job tweaking this so we can get a good view of it. But I like to say the owner's payroll, or your owner's payroll, like, this comes out of your payroll account. Like, you should be paying yourself. Like, an owner, when I first started my business, I paid my mortgage payment out of my business account, and I paid my trucks and my food, and I paid everything out of there, right? I was like, this is my business, and I'll do whatever I want. And that caused all sorts of problems in the beginning too. Understand where my money's going, and then maybe I'm going to give a sub. Maybe I'm going to give them 60% of the job, or something, whatever it is. But this is just a quick allocation that I might break down to be able to understand where my money is going to go. And I've got 3 rules: never cheat Uncle Sam, pay your payroll, right? You can't run a business if you don't pay your guys, and then your subs. You can't do work if you don't pay your subs. Go ahead and pull that down now, Ralph. We've had that up long enough, and we'll turn it over. I've been talking for a while. We're going to turn it over to the master of disaster, Dave Vetter, and he's going to share with us a little bit about what you think about allocation and separating your money and knowing whether it's in one account or many, what your thoughts are on just making sure you protect your revenue.
Through my experience, what I've found is if you talk to anybody that's an accountant, or an accountant that is working for your company, they don't like the idea of multiple savings accounts. Typically, they're like, why do we need that? This is how we're going to do it. We're going to allocate, and I've got this, and we've got a PO process, and blah, blah, blah. And what I find, though, is for owners or people that maybe are running the business, who are focused on sales, who are focused on operations or other items like that, and may not have any real accounting, background, that it is a lot easier for them to just feel safe. There's a safety and a confidence in knowing that, hey, you bring in $100. I want you to take, based on our payroll, I want you to take 30 of those $100, 30% or whatever that percentage may be for you. And I want you to put it in this little savings account that we got, a little side savings account that is around payroll. And I want you to take this. And we know that we're paying our subs 50 or 60%, 80%, whatever that may be on your margin on your jobs. And you got to set that off to the other side, right? So that it's a pocket for them. Because what you were talking about, where this all started was with Peter to pay Paul, is we end up seeing a lot of times where an owner can easily take their eye off the ball. They'll feel a lot of confidence. They'll look at their bank account, whatever that money is that makes you feel comfortable. You get a big win, you get a big down payment, you get regular recurring revenue, but you're like in an off season or in the middle of a season. And it gives you a false sense of security because you're starting to make decisions based on what your bank account says. And what ends up happening is you end up overspending. You end up spending way more than you probably should. If you took 30% of your revenue and stuck it in a little pocket over here, and you took another 50% of it and stuck it in a pocket over here, and by the time you were all done, then you actually can see the money that is available to you to make extra purchases or make those kind of financial choices, whether it's to buy a $80,000 truck or not. And that can really put people in a bad situation. So what we end up seeing happen, and it happens a lot, is an owner will take their eye off the ball. They won't understand how much money is actually available to do extra stuff. They'll spend that money. Then they recognize that they've spent that money and they're like, oh no, I don't have enough money for an upcoming large project or several projects, or I've got all these payments that are due. And then what do? They take the money from a new job and allocate, just starting small. I just need $10,000. I just need $14,000. And then another job needs another $5,000. And then next thing you know, now the balance on the jobs that you already had is due. Well, now you need to borrow from the next project, and you're still spending your money, and you're not making wise financial decisions, because those decisions could come all the way down to, hey, do I need the staff the size that it has to be? Should I postpone, should I postpone a purchase for a piece of equipment? Do I really need to restripe my parking lot? Whatever those choices that you're making are, or do I need to go buy my boat or anything like that? And you end up robbing Peter to pay Paul. And that's what ends up happening. And that is a snowball effect. That is horrible business practice. It will immediately strain all of your financial position. And that is where we get panic phone calls from different owners. And I've heard it just my whole career. And I've even seen it internally when working for larger corporations, where you have maybe branch locations, and they're under enormous pressure from senior leadership, the board of directors, whoever it is, to make sure that they hit their financial numbers. And what ends up happening is they're like, well, we collected revenue that's allocated for next month, but I'm going to use it and report it early, which is highly illegal, by the way. And it's fraud. And you can see operations that continue to operate saying that, oh, I'm good. Look at my numbers. Well, in reality is you're misallocating funds, and that can end you up fired or worse. And you got to make sure that you understand, you're putting your piles together, you're tracking it, and you understand your cash flow. And that's really what cash flow is about. Cash flow is about, most small businesses don't have $5 extra million just sitting in a bank account somewhere. They're starting small. You're scrapping when you first start your business.
Yeah.
And you got to make sure that you don't outspend what you have until you're able to earn and build that up. So, at any point.
And most companies don't understand, what it actually takes, what profit actually looks like. That's what, that's where they're having an issue, right? They think, man, all this money is mine. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, sometimes that's 3%, 4%, 5%. Like, that's not a ton of money all the time. And so you've got to really understand that. And like, when you're self-performing, like maybe your payroll is in that 50% range. Maybe it's in that 55% range. Maybe it's in that 40% range. You've got to understand where that is. When you're subcontracting out, maybe it's in that 15% range, that 20% range. Because if you take that money, if you rob Peter to pay Paul, if you take that money and you cannot make payroll, this is one of the number one things I hear, whether, it doesn't matter where you are, is I don't have no money for payroll. How am I going to make payroll? If you think about the things that keep an owner up at night, it's how am I going to make payroll? 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 In fact, payroll becomes the number one thing that they're working on, and owners are living to make payroll. How do I make payroll? How do I make payroll? And you can't take that payroll money. You got to know that payroll money, but you got to know out of every job what your allocation is, right? You have to understand, like if we're mowing lawns, right? We know that our net profit, right, on the year, like for landscape mowing, might be 7, 8, 9%, maybe.
Yep. Very common, very competitive industry.
Very competitive industry. We know that our enhancements might be 50, 60% margin, right?
Yep.
So what we got to do is we got to sell our enhancements, right? We got to make sure that we're getting those things and that we're allocating that money properly. And sometimes we need to use our enhancement money to fund our payroll. Right? If we don't sell enhancements, we might not be in business.
As long as that's your business plan. If your business plan is like, hey, we know that we're going to sell an extra 40% of work based on our, say you are a landscape company and you've got a base book of customers that you're providing like maintenance for or something like that. If you know that you're going to sell an additional, on average, 40%, 30%, whatever of additional construction work, landscape construction work to those customers, then you understand you can create a different allocation for those funds. That your landscaping requires so much extra labor and so much, especially I guess in summertime and stuff, so you're allocating more towards payroll, but you also know that with any extra work you're doing that you've got a higher margin on those jobs. You can change that allocation to go more towards, just different things you need. And so maybe it is more towards payroll, maybe it's less towards payroll, more towards equipment, whatever that is. But you have to have the plan. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just understanding that you have to be able to see that. You're like, Dave, I know that you are really good. You talk about it a lot during these podcasts, and where you are breaking down and talking about looking towards the future all the time. And you have to have that plan. If you're just looking at your bank account and you're not setting, and you don't know that this money is allocated towards payroll, this is equipment, this is subs, this is materials, this is manufacturing, this is repair, whatever that is, then you are doomed, because what'll happen is you can float that for a while, right? You can take that, it's just this one time. It's just this one time. But what always happens is businesses change. What always happens in business is something unexpected happens, right? And if you've been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and then all of a sudden there is a weather event, you have some catastrophic mechanical problem or something, you have a large customer of yours that suddenly goes out to RFP and you lose them, whatever those things are, and you've been borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, you have burned all of your cushion, and then you're in a world of hurt. So the recommendation is not only to understand where your money is, not only if you are just taking a simple approach and just allocating money into different savings accounts, if that helps you, but also take advantage of the opportunities when times are good, right? You always see people, I always see business owners that are scrambling for credit when they need credit. And guess what's the one thing you won't get?
Right.
is credit when you need credit, because the first thing they do is look at where your accounts are at, and you're struggling and they see that, and you're, here's a few $1,000. Yeah, good luck with that. And so, but when you're doing, when your business is rolling high and your bank accounts are solid and you're in the middle of season and you feel like, man, I'm on top of the world right now, my recommendation would be that is the perfect time to secure a line of credit for if things go bad. And
that's so true. Start with those credit cards, get those business credit cards, make your regular payments on a business credit card, right? Because what happens is, listen, don't use a credit card if you don't have the cash to pay the credit card. All you're doing is you're just building your business credit, because off of your EIN number, if you don't have any credit history, when you go to apply for business credit, they're not going to give you anything, right? So it starts with some of those business credit cards, but you only use a credit card when you have the cash in the bank to pay for the purchase anyways, and you're just using the credit to build your business. But what happens is you start to use those credit cards, and it starts to trigger, and it starts to say, okay, now they're consistent at making monthly payments. And now we're buying our trucks and we're buying our equipment and we're making those monthly payments, and we're consistent because the bank is just managing risk. And then the next step is to open up a line of credit, right? Not that you need the line of credit or want to use a line of credit, but that line of credit can actually be a gap or a bridge that can help you from one season to the next, or help you in a downturn. As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, what happens if you get sick? What happens if your wife gets cancer? What happens if you lose a kid? What happens that, there's life happens, right? So at the end of the day, what are you doing to insulate yourself? That's what it's coming down to, is just insulation. And how do you make sure that you know those things? But if you don't know your numbers, like how much is for equipment? How much money are you spending on fuel? How much money are you spending on labor? If you don't understand the numbers that run your business, you don't know where to cut and reduce expenses. And then on top of that, you don't know how to allocate the funds to make sure that you're paying your bills. And so a good seasoned accounting team, they'll be able to run that out of one account, and they're just going to earmark those funds. They're just going to start earmarking, right? And they're just going to say, okay, this is for this money belongs here, this money belongs there. And they can manage that account because they're experienced, right? And it's not the $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year bookkeeper. It's a senior level bookkeeper or accountant or CPA or controller, whatever you want to put in that position, but somebody who's got the experience to be able to run your business, because that's what it comes down to, is just good, clean financial reporting. So I think that's a great tip, Dave, on the get your credit while you can get your credit, right? Get it while the getting is good is a good tip. Well, what final words can you leave with everybody today?
Well, if the one thing I would say is, if you're new to business, or even if you've been in business for a little while and you find yourself and you just are not as confident maybe as you think you feel like you should be when it comes to just understanding your financial position, where you're going to be now, a month, 6 months, a year. You were talking about hiring somebody within internal staff that you can explain your concerns, that will help you position yourself, position your financials so that you are protected. There's outside third-party providers. There's lots of bookkeeping services that are available. Get yourself a good CPA, talk about your strategic plan, understand how your business operates, understand how you spend money and how you make money, and make sure that you anticipate the seasons, and make sure you understand those ebbs and flows in your business. Make sure that your financial team understands the same one, and that you have a plan to protect yourself at all times. And it's especially when you're new or just small. A lot of there's so many businesses out there that are small businesses that can't, that are not in a position to carry through 12 months. There's that 12 month of cash reserves, or whatever, that, that's what people consider a solid business. If you do not have 12 months or more of cash reserves on hand to run and operate your business, then you need to take you need to create strategic plans to go ahead and make sure that you are not in a position where you owe the government a bunch of money, not in a position where you owe a lot of payroll, and that you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, right?
And plan for economic downturn, plan for recession. Yeah. Right now you see the stock market going crazy, you see banks going crazy. Plan for that. Put a little money aside. Be careful of what you're doing out there. Amit says, "Hey, dear God, this one is a killer, Dave." Amit, thanks for joining the call. Thanks for being on our podcast this morning. Thanks for the input. If this was helpful, give it a like, give it a share, give us some comments. We love your feedback. We love interacting and chatting. Thank you for the time. If you like this, follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on Facebook. David Wescott, look for me on LinkedIn, look for me on Facebook. I'm in both of those places. And I haven't gravitated towards anything else yet, but that's kind of where I'm hanging out. And follow Dave Vetter on LinkedIn. So hit us up, give us a call, and if we can help with anything or share anything with you, we'd love to be able to do that. If not, it's great seeing you, and we will look forward to being here next week, same time. Have a great week.